Okay.
First,
I'd just like to know, is there anyone here, maybe just we're getting the audio alone, that's here for the first time? If you are, I'd like to know where you heard about this, just for future reference. Any newcomers at all?
No, everybody on has been on before.
Okay, let's start off. All right, I'm going to start off as I usually do with this kickoff question. It's very short. I'll just read it, and that'll get us started. A little focus. In chapter, this was the one that was posted on the reading group website. In chapter 12 of the Fountainhead, Catherine Halsey rushes to Peter Keating's apartment and asks that they be married immediately. She explains that after doing hours of research for her uncle, Ellsworth Toohey, she had experienced a panic attack while looking at a huge shadow of Toohey, who was working in another room that didn't move. I thought that was very kind of Edgar Allan Poe kind of interesting. Anyway, Catherine continues, quote, "That's when it got to me. It wouldn't move, that shadow, but I thought all the paper was moving. I thought it was rising very slowly off the floor and it was going to come to my... That's when I screamed. And Peter, he didn't hear. He didn't hear it because the shadow didn't move. Then I seized my hat and coat and I ran. I think he said, why, Catherine, what time is it? Where are you going?" Something like that. I'm not sure, but I didn't look back and I didn't answer. I couldn't. I was afraid of him. Afraid of Uncle Ellsworth, who's Peter. I can't understand it, but I'm afraid. Not so much anymore, not here with you, but I'm afraid. And my question, of course, was why did Catherine suddenly fear her uncle? A fear that seemed to come from nowhere. Frankly, when I write these, I go through the reading a couple of times, and I don't write things that I think I clearly know the answer to. In this case, was another case where I didn't really understand the fear, and that's why I posed it as a question. So I want to open this up. Anyone?
Well,
David?
Yeah, I had a thought. It's a fascinating question, George, and it's very weird. I guess any panic attack is weird to anyone except the person having it. Can you still hear me? My audio, something's wrong with my connection.
I can hear you.
Okay. But I noticed that when she's finished, the story continues. You just got a little hysterical, and Keating says, "No, it wasn't that. He was thinking of the loudspeaker in the lobby of the strike meeting."
Right.
That to me was an interesting clue that I didn't go back and reread that scene, but Keating and Catherine wanted to get out of the meeting at a point when Ellsworth seemed to be a real presence as he was talking about losing all personality, losing all individuality in the mass. And somehow his voice was like, carried that message, it resonated with that message so much that they felt like they were going to be engulfed. At least that's the way I read it. And so I was wondering if maybe Catherine had that feeling just seeing the shadow of her uncle. Like the shadow of, the shadows are, a symbol for dark and stains.
Is there, it also occurred to me what Keating later said about the panic attack. I don't know about the scene you referred to. Is there in that scene, I remember them, at first she didn't want to leave, right? Keating comes, let's get out of here. She wanted to stay. Then later she says, okay, let's go. Now at that point, is there any indication that she was somehow frightened, or I just thought she'd just given in to Keating at that point?
You may be right. I have to go back and look at that. What chapter was that?
I think it's kind of subtle, but there's a driving theme in the characters about their identity, whether they have identity or not. And I think the reason why Tui is quiet because he goes, she finally gets me. When she goes out of the house screaming, he's like, she finally understands that I'm like a vampire, or I'm going to destroy people with identities in my path. And if you have anything left in your characters, if you're smart enough.
Seems like that would have to be relevant. David?
Right. For me, Tui kind of is an embodiment of the altruist morality that people like Keating and Karen claim to live by. And the reason why that's kind of frightening to them is because if they perceive him for what he truly is, for what they kind of can sense on some level, that he's this manipulative sociopath, judging the underlying premises that underline their own morality. So it's like coming face to face with the death principle or the death motive, or what she ascribed to be the underlying motive behind the altruist morality behind socialism and all other forms of collectivism.
I didn't take Catherine as being that insightful. That's why I was wondering about the scene.
It's intuitive. She is not consciously aware of it, but she can kind of sense it. Is my impression of it anyway.
Well, that shadow, was that really? I hate the room working. Was that supposed to be really his shadow? If so, it didn't move, which is clearly something going on there. Or was that shadow supposed to be entirely imaginary?
Yeah. I kind of took it as maybe he's so deep in thought that he really doesn't hear when his niece starts screaming, which might explain why she had this kind of sense that something was terribly wrong at that point, because when Tui is thinking when he's and to manipulate people and just planning all sorts of subtle ways to undermine the structures of society. So that might be why at that moment she kind of felt like she was in the presence of pure evil, which is what Tui is.
Oh, it has to be something like that. And stick it in there.
Actually, this might sound like an odd comparison, but it reminded me of the Hannibal Lecter. Dr. Lecter is often described as being perfectly still at all times, and it's the first thing that anybody notices about him to move, or he has this unnatural stillness about him.
So you think that shadow really was supposed to be Tui's shadow, wasn't just an apparition that she imagined in a panic attack?
Well, I mean, it could be, but I don't see any real indication that it was.
Okay. You know, I've always
George,
considered... Sure.
Okay, I just went back to that passage I alluded to and read it. This is in chapter 9. We're working from the hardback. But, I mean, the words, as Tui is speaking, this is from Keating's point of view. Keating looked at Catherine. There was no Catherine. There was only a white face dissolving in the sounds of the loudspeaker. It was not that she heard her uncle. Keating could feel no jealousy of him. He wished he could. It was not personal that had left her empty. Her will surrendered, and no human will holding her, but a nameless thing in which she was being swallowed.
Well, that would certainly support your interpretation, David. I mean, there was a bad reaction at that talk, so.
And that's what it says. Let's get out of here.
Book, Death on the Nile, Perot says, don't open your heart to evil or it might make its home there. I mean, Agatha Christie's just packing a lot of characteristics in one paragraph. And I think Rand's being more subtle.
That might be why she sees the, that might be why she sees the shadow as opposed to just having her see Tui himself working at his desk, because, you know, it's symbolic of the fact that she has been living in Tui's shadow. She doesn't really have a personality of her own. She just has whatever ideas he puts into her head, basically.
Yeah.
Barry, are you a writer?
I hope to be one, yeah.
Okay.
What type? Fiction, nonfiction?
Fiction. Sorry, I keep unmuting myself there. Yeah, I want to write fiction and maybe some nonfiction later down the line.
What do you, if you don't mind my asking, what do you do now? Are you a student or?
I was a salesman up until recently. Now I'm looking for work.
Oh, okay. Adele, you have anything to say about any of this?
I was just thinking that maybe the choice of the shadow was that she was able to sort of amplify his both his size and the terror behind him.
Yeah, I know that it's emphasized that she says, well, he always treated me wonderfully. He was always kind to me. So,
Well, the shadow is also very much a device of the early filmmaking. You know, the film noir and
yeah.
the shadow walking. It's an anonymous presence.
Rand
I
did
love
start
those.
to get better.
I love those scenes in those film noir movies. Somebody.
Yeah.
Okay, anything?
One other thing is that Rand's a romantic realist, and I always thought the realist part was if it was an hallucination of Catherine's, if she was hallucinating, Rand would have made it clear that she was hallucinating or dreaming. But I think Catherine actually just saw the shadow not move, and that kind of magnified
It appeared to be her. Appeared to her to be moving.
the paper.
So, yeah, yeah. Okay, anyone want to say anything else on this topic before we move along to something else?
This is another example of Catherine speaking prophetically and speaking prophetically about if they do not choose what they really want when they actually have the insight, they will get sucked into the realm of Ellsworth Toohey and they are doomed.
Yeah. That's Mark, right?
Yeah.
Speaking.
Yeah.
Oh, hi, Mark. Yeah,
I did.
terrific point.
Yeah, very good. Okay, let's just sort of take this a little at a time. I just want to ask if anyone has any opinions. This, okay, I think I'm thinking of chapter 10 there. Okay, chapter 11 begins with Rourke opens his own office after the incident with that, what's his name, Heller and Snipe. And then, of course, Keating comes to visit him. Now, I get a kick out of these meetings between Keating and Rourke. I wonder why Rourke even talks to him. I mean, it's like, but it's interesting. It seems to me all these comments that Rand puts in by Keating, they're extremely, to use a more modern term, passive aggressive. Oh, this is great. Congratulations. Of course, it's not as impressive looking at the your office, but that'll happen. And he does all these sort of, on the one hand, congratulating him while trying to demean him to a certain extent, which I guess is practically the definition. Anyone want to comment on this conversation, if you remember it, between Keating and Rourke in Rourke's new office? What do you think?
Only a quick comment and kind of an overall thing about Keating is that he has fits of self-honesty that reveal themselves with Howard Rourke and occasionally with others, and then he reverts back to the way he thinks he should be, society making him the man that he thinks he ought to be.
Right.
And to go back to George's point is artists have these egos where people come to them and love their work or comment about their work. And the artist is like, well, as long as they like my work, I don't care. And it took me a decade or two to, getting my work, but I allowed for it. I knew something was wrong with them, but since they said, and I needed that.
It's kind
And
of,
that was an interesting learning experience.
Now, did it end up they really didn't like your work, that they were being insincere, or?
it was something sociopathic. They needed my presence in some way, and it took me a while to just read those signs and just walk away from it.
Okay.
And so maybe that shows Rourke's
Comments, I don't have them marked, but where it indicates that Rourke kind of understands that he still has some things to learn. It's not like he, sprang out of the womb fully developed. There were some comments that, that's. And what about that? It struck me as sort of an odd philosophical conversation when Keating says, "Well, you mean you're not certain?" And they go through that runaround, like, "Well, no, I didn't say." A novelistic version of the nature of certainty. Anyone remember that or want to comment on that? Different editions don't seem to be uniform, so. All right.
So Peter and Rourke. I'm thinking about these two chapters, 11 and 12.
Right.
They're going back and forth between Rourke and Dominique and Peter, showing out different parts of their character. But so Peter wants Rourke to be uncertain.
Right.
It's in the same way that Dominique doesn't want Rourke to be uncertain, but she has to be uncertain because she can't afford for him to be certain. Rourke is doing what he's doing, period. For Peter, that means that Rourke will have real talent versus Peter's fake talent. And Rourke undermining of Peter's character. Whereas Dominique, she needs Rourke to fail because then that justifies her own facing the world. Okay, I'll say one more thing about this. So Peter's like, you're uncertain, right? You're uncertain because if you're uncertain, that means that my uncertainty is justified. Because if your uncertainty is justified, and so he's wanting Rourke to be uncertain, so that his life doesn't crumble. Dominique wants Rourke to be certain, even though if he's certain and if what he's saying is true, her whole life crumbles. And conversation, it just speaks to that dynamic in these two chapters. When Dominique is speaking with Alva Scarrett, and just in the next chapter, she's talking about how she destroys the statue, which is the representative be allowed to exist, and she doesn't want Rourke to exist because if Rourke really can exist, then the project is made worthless. In the same way that Keating's entire project is made worthless, but from completely different angles. Okay, I'll stop there.
That's a good point. Good point. Thank you.
I think with Dominique, it's more that she doesn't believe she doesn't believe things that are fundamentally good can survive on Earth. So with things like wanting to destroy the statue and wanting to destroy Rourke, I think it's more a case of if I don't do it, then somebody else will, and it'll be somebody more malevolent than me. I think that's how Ayn Rand described it anyway. I'm not entirely sure.
I did not like that scene where she destroys the statue. I understand the point of including it, but that kind of bothered me. She goes to that trouble. Huh?
He's a weird character.
Yeah, very odd.
Yeah.
That bother anybody else? I can make your point without destroying a beautiful statue.
Or Rourke.
Well, George, what about the explanation? I'll turn on my screen. Sorry, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Okay, great. I thought the point was that Dominique is very different from Keating in that she has this inner idealism that she thinks is not possible in the world, and she's taken the route, a kind of a Buddhist route. I don't want the pain of having the world crush my stand. Kind of, the Buddhist point, all pain comes from frustration of desire. So the solution is don't desire things. Give up desire. And she does that partway as far as the world goes until she meets Rourke. But with the statue, there's also a little Keating-like element here in that she doesn't want anyone to see it. It's like other her enjoyment of skills would be corrupted if others see it. And so it is a more aggressive and also socially oriented focus. So much on others in a way that, for example, that Rourke just could care less about.
There's also a kind of cleanliness. If you love something like opera or whatever, an artwork, so intensely, it shows so much of yourself that it's frightening. Sometimes it's frightening to share with someone who's not going to get it. It's just like the socialists don't want to share this with anyone who's not 100% related to it. It's too vulnerable.
Yeah, I understand that. One thing I haven't read this novel in so long, and I read through the whole thing. This whole business about, what's the guy's name? Scarrett, the guy that works for one paper. She seems to genuinely like him, or at least she indicates that she likes him. When he writes these kind of dumb columns, right? He writes sort of on these sort of causes like evil of this or that. So he's obviously not a very deep person in a lot of ways. But is that liking real on her part, or is that just the way she treats people? She acts like she really likes him, but then she clearly doesn't. She gets sort of a kick out of just telling him, I don't really give a shit what you think, and I'm just here.
It sort of unravels in this chapter where she's all, "Oh, Alva, you're saying that, but that's just you talking in your columns. You don't really think that, do you?" And he gets upset, and she's like, "Oh my gosh, you really did think that." How
your own bullshit.
sad! You're so cute.
Justin, I always thought she treated him like a big sloppy Labrador, completely safe and harmless.
Yeah, it's like she sees him as kind of a harmless fool.
So what about this sort of going out on dates with Keating? She didn't like the guy. Self-punishment sort of thing, or what's going on there?
I don't know, like she seems to have a really masochistic streak. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that might be a fair assessment. I think we just
it's also like she understands that her father's trying to manipulate the marriage between her and Keating, or at least the connection. She's like, "Oh, let's go for this ride and see where it takes me, because it doesn't matter."
Right.
Yeah, maybe it's kind of like a rebellion in reverse. It's like, so I'm going to do the opposite of what he expects, and accept it wholeheartedly.
Well, I love that scene where. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That's just what I love about Dominique so much. She's the ultimate troll. She goes around and says what people don't expect her to say, and in that way, she almost is free, which is what she wants. And
she is free.
Yeah.
I mean, she's free without, I mean, with the exception of Rourke, but in her character, she's like, I'm going to do whatever. Doesn't matter.
Well, I love that scene where after Catherine comes over to see Keating and says, we got to get married, and then she leaves. And then Keating's mother, she said, what's up to you? She's a wonderful girl. Da, da, da. And then when he went, come on, tell me, she talked to him all night about how you should be, have a wonderful life. And then she lectures him, I guess, all night about, what a mistake it would be, because she's not socially, she won't promote his social standing, let me put it that way.
Yeah, it's quite evil, isn't she? She's quite manipulative, and it's not about what Peter needs or wants, even though she says it is.
Because we've all met people like that, like Mrs. Keating.
I always had the fantasy that Mrs. Keating and two would make.
Well, there's it is to Peter what Tui is to Catherine. It's this ominous. I mean, she could be his shadow. Just the manipulative side of it.
Yeah.
Of her.
Absolutely.
No,
And
sometimes
the same essential, you could say, kind of language patterns, where in a soon to come future chapter, when Tui's talking with Catherine and Peter, he says these little innocuous things like, "Oh yes, it's so nice to hold someone's hand, but after a while your hands start to sweat."
Yeah.
Right? And he says this little thing that is, "Oh yes, isn't it wonderful, and isn't falling in love so cute?" And he poisons the goodness by putting these frames on it that just make it sick. And that's exactly what Mrs. Keating does with Peter.
Yeah.
She says, "Oh yes, of course you can do it. Of course you'll just leave your loving mother behind, but it's not about me, Peter. It's not about me. It's about you and your life. Just leave me to rot."
Even though it feels like a funeral.
Yeah.
She's a piece of Mrs. Keating. We discussed her, I think, in the first session.
As far as them hooking up, though, I think if this was a 21st century novel, Tui would definitely be.
Well, just thinking, if Tui were to go on one of these dating sites, looking for a woman, what would he list as his desired characteristics? I don't think he'd say, "I like to take walks on the beach" or anything. But I think if they went on a dating site, how would they advertise themselves?
Yeah, an unchallenging girl. That was the description of his sexual life.
And I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. An unchallenging what?
Shop girl.
Oh.
Clerk.
And doesn't someone talk about his sex life? That he likes bimbos? Tui?
Oh, really? Well, Adele seems.
Yes, where's that? Is that later in the book?
Yeah, it's in a later chapter. I think it's the one where it describes his childhood and growing up, the real exposition of his character. I think it was in there.
I think, but wasn't that when he
right.
was younger though? And then when he got a bit older, he kind of seemed to lose all interest in sex.
Went MGTOW.
Yeah, he went MGTOW, exactly. Yeah.
I've always thought Tui's one of the great villains that I know of in the evil. I mean, I mentioned one time in a L.org essay that if you look, which are reprinted, I think, in the Journals of Ayn Rand, I believe it's in that book. She had the stuff on Tui, that's sort of the explaining to herself, I guess, the character, is much longer than any of the other characters, including Howard Rourke. And I think that makes sense because he's such a complicated character.
I always thought it was interesting that there's no other character like Tui in any of Rand's novels. Like Rourke arguably has an analogue, but There's no Ellsworth Toohey anywhere else. He's
think
like
you're right.
the unique character.
Yeah. Yeah. But to me, he's a fascinating character. I guess probably for me because he is an intellectual and he kind of understands the implications of what he's spouted. He's where he's going. So, but he's a fascinating character.
As he says, I don't like it. I never thought I'd like it.
Okay, Tui says that somewhere.
Yes, when
In
he
his
does
confession
when
to
Tui does
King.
his unmasking speech
Spoilers,
that no one
spoilers,
has
spoilers.
ever written, it's just so epic. Oh.
We're not supposed to talk about nothing there anymore.
I think with Atlas Shrugged, Rand's aesthetic changed, where she saw that evil really, on the long term, it's nothing. They may have momentary power, but they really are not great people. So the good and the good are fighting against each other. But in the Fountainhead, it's Rourke against Tui.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
So
even Floyd
no,
Barristan, Atlas Shrugged, who is I consider kind of a Tui analog. He's a minor character. He's consciously evil. He manipulates philosophy in order to move the process forward, but she really doesn't get into his psychology, and he ends up being a minor character.
So, Michael, you think maybe the reason there's no Ellsworth Toohey in Atlas Shrugged is because Ellsworth Toohey is too strong to be a villain in Atlas Shrugged? Like, that's not the depiction of evil that she wanted to give in that novel.
Yeah. Agree. Atlas Shrugged is about how the nameless system and petty bureaucrats personified in Wesley Mouch, right? That's who we're dealing with. We're dealing with nothing. That evil is it's simply the absence of good, kind of an Augustinian move in Atlas Shrugged. But in Fountainhead, it was personalized.
You need to write a mem about that, Mark. You need to mem that. Is it mem? Mime? How do you say it?
Meme.
Meme. You need to meme that.
Yes. I'll mem it too.
Everybody gets that wrong.
Showing your age there, Michael.
Listen up. Just a technical point. I couple.
Hey, I did it too. At one point, I thought it was mem as well, or meme.
Nicole,
I thought it was all sophisticated.
Nicole, I have a technical question for you. I have this little bubble keeps coming up on the top of my screen. Said, William Thomas, can you make me the presenter?
That George. No, that I'm logged in as William Thomas. I got to fix that. This is David. But I was trying to share my webcam and I kept clicking on screen, which means share the screen. So forget it.
There is a guy named William Thomas that I've encountered before, and I couldn't.
Yeah, there is.
I didn't think I was doing that.
Yeah, no, we don't like William Thomas at all in this group. We think he's. I am of course kidding. I'm a huge William Thomas fan.
Of course you are. You did an interview with him.
Yeah, Will is great. I just thought I'd give him a ribbing if maybe he could hear this at some point.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. But can I make? Mark raised an issue, well, no. Michael raised this issue about Rand's aesthetic, but Mark's point was about in the Fountainhead, it's good versus evil is the central conflict, and in Atlas, it's good versus good. And Rand, make a point in her in the Romantic Manifesto that it should be good versus good, conflicting values. But I mean, doesn't that apply in a way to the Fountainhead? I'm sure she would argue that it does, in that Rourke's battle is not against Tui per se. Tui is part of the obstacle that the world sets in his way, but his battle is really against Dominique and Winans, who have his underlying values and ideals, but they're blocked. And
now that I think of it, I know we haven't gotten this far, but even Tui, I think, is actually defeated fairly easily when we get to the end.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or was it the fellow on the phone, Mark? Is that your name? Are you the guy that said you didn't think Tui was even that major of a character in the Fountainhead? Or did I misunderstand that?
I think you misunderstood that. I was saying that Floyd Ferris in Atlas Shrugged is similar to Tui. He's the closest analog, but he's a minor character in Atlas Shrugged.
I see. All right. More comments before we move on, Mike?
Regarding Rourke's battle and fighting with others, I don't see Rourke actually battling. I see Rourke steadfast in his vision that he has, and he really doesn't fight. His is kind of a Mahatma Gandhi thing almost. He's passive. This is what I'm doing. I don't think about you, and I don't care what you think. This is my vision, and I'm going to do it. The others try to fight him, and he's like, "Oh, don't mention that," or "No, I don't think about that." And he's just going along his life, pushing aside in the wake of his boat going through the sea.
And that is
he's
what
following
separates.
his vision.
Yeah.
So he's battling, not actively fighting others. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Oh,
sure.
And I think that's what makes powerful is that they're the antidote to the kind of selfless characters who try to rope you into their worldview, or they try to manipulate you into your worldview. But the antidote is to stick to your creativity. And Rand does that better than
be true to yourself, in other words.
And that is what makes her heroes unique, really, in the history of literature. Because usually, when you have a hero, the reason why the villain exists is to serve as an obstacle to defeat the villain. It's like you have a story where somebody murders this guy's family, and then he spends 10 years. The whole reason for his existence then becomes to get rid of this villain character. Whereas in Rand's fiction, the villains really make no difference to the heroes in their lives, other than to serve as a minor obstacle or a minor annoyance, which once they get over, they don't really think about what happens to the villain after that.
You know, later in the Fountainhead, is it two? But I don't think of you.
Yep.
You know, I remember in college when I was running the student objectives. I mean, most of the people I palled around with were in that orbit. We'd sit around at Louis Laura Love's, Arizona, which was a hamburger joint. And I remember one guy spoke up, but he said very serious, and I've heard similar things from other admirers of mine. You know, that's a great line. I just wish at some point in my life I can get in a situation where I can say that to somebody I don't know.
Apparently, it was actually Frank O'Connor who said that in real life, and that was like she said that was one of two lines in the Fountainhead that actually came from real life, and the first one was Frank O'Connor said that to somebody at a party or something like.
Well, I've heard the same line actually in a movie from the 30s or something. I saw it on TMC not long ago. Think of you. So apparently other people have thought of it, but I still remember that kid just so wishing. It was such a wonderful line. He had a good put that one. He just hoped somebody would ask him someday. So, but by the way, going back, it relates to what you said, Mike, to that question: Are you certain or uncertain? My impression of that scene was that Rourke just didn't think in those terms. He didn't think, well, you know, can I be? He just, like you said, it's straight ahead. my judgment is off. That I'm not. I'm not being objective with my own work. But if I read that and I think, well, that's good. This other thing is crap. Then the other thing probably is crap. But you understand what I'm saying? That I'm Michael. Do you think? Well,
No, I don't have that, but I'm insanely kind to myself. Love everything I do.
Well, I wish I'd loved everything I wrote, but there's that old adage among writers: you have to get some distance from it, because when you are working on something, whether it's writing or whatever it is, you're so close to it when you finish it, you're aware of all the flaws, especially if you're on a deadline and you're pumping stuff out. You don't have time to invest in something you would like to have, so you're aware of a wording that could have been made, or something like that, an idea that could express more clearly. Well, in some cases, that's just part of the business. But I find that I do have to get some distance. I've had it years ago, and I don't remember particularly writing it, and I go, hey, that's pretty good.
Yeah. I mean, I have had. I've never done what you do, George. Exactly. It's usually in the middle of doing a piece of writing that I feel like, who am I kidding? I should be out, working construction or something. I can't do this. But after that, I go back and look at things, and I do have the sense sometimes, God, that was good. Well, I used to be really good. And it's and I'm sure it's because I'm reading things I wrote a while back that I don't remember all the things I wished I could have improved at the time, all the other issues I chose not to get into, or anyway. So I wonder if Rourke,
there is a life lesson there.
In my case, just to make it sound like I'm not totally frivolous, but I tend to look at the big picture and the big form and the feeling of it. And if I got the big form and the feeling there, I don't quibble over the details. But I'm not a writer. I mean, writers, you mess up a sentence and have copy editors. But in painting, it's just stick with the big overall view. And if I'm on path, everything's fine.
We are pedantic, all right.
The word I become very fond of is actual history behind this. I remember the Barbara Brandon, Bob Roll thing, the book review catalog that they put out. Nathan and Nathaniel Brandon used to review a lot for that point. He was reviewing, I think, an anthology or something, and he referred to the essays as being of uneven quality. And I love that, because now when I think a little uneven,
Let's be kind to yourself.
I thought, what a great word, euphemistic word. I have just, my writing can be a little uneven at times, but
if David was talking about a bit ago, which is if Fountainhead is good versus evil, and Atlas Shrugged is more good versus good. Atlas Shrugged is where she really laid out that evil itself is impotent. Evil lives by being a parasite on the good. That it only gets its power from the good. And I was thinking, as you were saying that, David, about Tui's power in the novel. Tui's power is always by corrupting people who have something. Right? There's commissions that he's not getting. There's Dominique's beauty and craftiness and her own strength that is corrupt, and he corrupts it a little bit further. And everything that he does is through Rourke's way. Are people who have some type of wealth, some type of power, some type of strength, whether papers before Winan befriends him, or whether it's the commissions, or whether it's the fact that committees can't make decisions. The evil is always impotent in and of itself, and revisiting that concept as I think about the Fountainhead, just how the entire book just plays that out step by step by step.
Do you agree with that?
Where he doesn't get caught up in that parasitic world.
But do you agree with the idea that evil is impotent?
Pretty much, yeah.
In the way, I'll be quiet.
I would say that I don't know anywhere, I can't remember anywhere in the Fountainhead where the point about the impotence. I think it's all over the novel in that, Mark, I agree with you that true evil is only through, first of all, dependence on Winan and Winan's indulgence.
Are there?
Okay, good. And it's also through, I mean, his attempt to on vulnerable people like Kitty and Catherine, and then his opposition to Rory. But isn't it? He fails in the end when he's a parasite, and when the host dies, in particular when the banner, Winan's banner goes down. I mean, we're jumping way ahead now, but he's nowhere. And when he loses down, passing contemptuous indulgence, he doesn't have her. He doesn't succeed in turning Winan against Rourke. Winan, unfortunately, does it himself. But so I think the more I think about this, the more I think there's an implicit theme of, I mean, there's a broad question. Rand, I think, dealt with in all novels. How do good people deal with evil? How do they survive in a world full of evil? And sometimes they can't, like in We the Living. But in this case, Rourke counted on, at the end of the day, on jury of 12 rational people who prevented him from being sent to jail, and one who comes out doing exactly what he wants to do, getting the girl, and Dewey's nowhere. So it's, I bet if Rand were here, she would argue, okay, I didn't make it explicit, but guys, can't.
Yeah, actually, one thing that always struck me about the ending is the way the Tui and Keating, they just sort of fade away, and we don't hear anything about what happens to Keating after the, I don't think. And Tui, we hear that he's gone to work at some other newspaper, but that's all we hear. There's no real indication of what's going to happen to him after that, and it's almost as if, okay, now that they've served their purpose in the story, we don't need to concern ourselves with them anymore. And that's
they kind of dissolve.
Yeah, they dissolve.
Instead of being tied up like a package at the end, like this character ends up like this and this one ends up like that, they kind of just dissipate.
Well, the problem with, the situation Rourke's in, he's a creative artist, but he also has to make a living, so he has to deal with people. I see Michael laughing. You notice this. So the question is he going to compromise? Is he going to compromise? I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but is he going to compromise, or is he just going to wait to find people who respect him enough to say, okay, you just build it your way? But it's interesting. I found these minor character changes I find fascinating. I often read those several times. I don't remember all the specifics, but there's a part in this section we were reading, this meeting, where I think it's 2, maybe 3 potential customers come into his office. One's a wealthy woman who wants him to build a Tudor house, and she was recommended to him by, I guess, Heller recommended Keating. But these are
She's a zealot fan of Heller's.
Yeah. So, but those are interesting characters, and he turns down the business even though he needs the money. But this goes back to the reason I raised this point is we're talking about the villains. Now, is she supposed to be a villain? I don't. Are these sort of minor characters that say, "Hey, build me a Tudor house," because they like Tudor architecture? Doesn't make them villains.
She looking like a shell.
Yeah, that's true.
She was just the opinions of her friends. She wasn't.
Yeah.
She didn't have any identity. But I want to interrupt one thing is that, you know, the benevolent premise of the universe, malevolent view of the universe, benevolent view.
Benevolent
And I'm kind of
personality.
wondering, in Rourke, he had the faith that he was going to be in a benevolent world, that someone out there would like his work. And so I think there's a point, like with your articles and stuff, you have to put them out there and hope that the universe is benevolent enough that someone out there is going to buy it or understand it or grab onto it.
Right.
The other side of benevolence is that if somebody doesn't accept your work, you can always try again. Whereas on the malevolent side, you would be prevented from doing it for whatever reason.
Example of an early work, of course, is Cameron, who did sort of. I mean, I don't want to say failed, but he ended up being very bitter and so forth, and being drinking. You know, why? I guess because at some point Cameron gave up. Was that pretty much it? He just said, "Screw it. Nobody's gonna."
His bad time seemed to come after he was massively successful. So I don't think we can say that he tried hard enough in order to have a brilliant career before he was basically kicked out and regarded as a dinosaur.
Well, he also had his assistant, his manager.
Mm-hmm.
He had a genius manager that knew how to take care of all the other issues that he was in to handle. So he just focused on the architecture, and he had a manager that helped facilitate sales and help facilitate problem. And
Okay, I'd forgotten that. Yeah. Good.
When he went downhill. So I think that Rand used that to say that to really make it, you have to be independent like Rourke. You have to rely on.
Yeah, that's what I need. I need sort of a life manager. Just there's all the crappy little details that just lets me work. But I can't afford to buy one, or rent one, or pay one.
But I think Jennifer's trying to help you out with that, right?
Our questions, yeah. You know, I've always said that I've told it to so many people. You know, I'm really good on long-term planning projects. Eventually, I get them done. Sometimes I'm late. You know, it's the day-to-day stuff that really drives me crazy. It's the detail stuff. I'm in a project, and I'll drag my heels for a day or two. If I write a book, I'm typing right away on that book. But it's just I get very annoyed sometimes. I'm trying to overcome it at age 68, but I get very annoyed by having to kind of do routine things. But for some reason, it's always eating away at me. So anyway, I don't think this is supposed to be about my personal life. So anybody else want to make any comments? Unfortunately, because we're getting short on time here, about any of this reading material for this time.
I will say that I think that the end of Fountainhead and TUI and the existence of the Council of American Builders and the Council of American Writers and the Council, like that, it's just ready for Fountainhead Part 2, right? I don't believe that they've dissolved into the woodwork. I believe that they've just dispersed themselves and become more powerful. For those who have seen Wonder Woman or who are a really brilliant film.
No spoilers.
You can decapitate.
I haven't seen it yet, so.
You can decapitate Tui, but his influence is pernicious and lasting.
Well, he obviously is a personification of this. One thing I like, I don't know if it's heresy to say this. I like the fountain. I've always liked the Fountainhead better than Atlas Shrugged, primarily because of characters like Tui, but I also like it because it's cultural rather than political. Whereas I think Atlas Shrugged, as somebody mentioned, it deals with the political fallout. But I like the cultural nuances in it and these sort of middling characters. They're not as extreme as Tui, but they're so influenced by the culture. And it's amazing to me that this was published relevant. Many of the, as you mentioned, Michael, you see, or who was it just said that this sort of thing comes up all the time.
I'm sorry, does anyone think that Atlas Shrugged might be the Fountainhead Part 2? It's like what happens when people like Tui gain a certain amount of influence in society.
I never thought of it like that, but I suppose it's possible. But another thing that, and I guess we'll have to close up shop for a minute, but the other thing that fascinates me about Rand, since it's been a while since I've read any of her novels, about 15 years since I read The Fountainhead, but I'm reading it much more carefully this time. And, my influence of Rand is more or less philosophical idea. So when I finally got around to reading Shrugged in college, I skipped immediately to Galt's Speech because I wanted to read. I can't wait for the good part. I got to read Galt's Speech.
George, you may be the only person in the Western world who has, done that.
I know.
Oh, that's a story.
No, I forced myself to read it, but I just turned every page waiting for dialogue to start again.
So I kept looking at that thick book thinking, how am I going to get through this?
Like counting the pages.
I'm not a novelist. How am I going to get through this? And so I read Galt's Speech, loved it. And anyway.
This anarchist, this anarchist friend of mine said to me, that speech is really long. Like even Murray Rothbard said that he skipped by it when he got to it. And I said, yeah, I can see that in his.
But because Rand's influence on me was primarily abstract in philosophy.
That's Barry. What's that? I don't think of you.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, I can see that he skipped it.
But
you could write a novel around that.
Yeah.
Well, I heard a lot of things from Murray that I won't repeat here. But anyway, but the thing that amazes me when I read her novels is how attentive she must have been to physical characteristics of people, because you just can't make a lot of that up. I mean, her physical descriptions of the external world. This is a woman who was very attentive. She wasn't some sort of abstract philosopher who was very, very alert. Okay.
I remember she was a screenwriter. And she had a very cinematic, way, style as a speaker. I mean, as a writer.
Yeah, I would like to maybe sometime just devote at least part of a session. I know I go on about this because I think of Rand in very personal terms. I think, despite some disagreements with her, what a huge impact she had on this part of my life and on that part. And sometime I hope we can just sort of focus on that. Think of yourself in relation to those characters. Because I think Rand, from all the hundreds of objectivist types I've talked to over the years, young influenced that. I changed the way I thought about this and so on and so forth. Anyway, so Nicole, are you there?
I'm here. I think it's time to close up the meeting. Everybody have a great Saturday afternoon and enjoy the rest of your weekend. And I look forward to seeing everybody next week.